The backing alarm of the rental trailer was the only sound cutting through the humid morning air of Serenity Shores. A rhythmic beep that seemed to offend the very atmosphere of the neighborhood. I watched through the side mirror of my 1995 Bronco as the tires crunched over the pristine white gravel of the driveway, kicking up a small cloud of dust that drifted toward the manicured hydrangeas of the house next door. I had not even shifted into the park when I saw her. She was marching across the street with the stride of a general inspecting the front lines, a clipboard clutched against her chest like a shield. It was barely 8:30 a.m. on a Tuesday, yet she was dressed in an impeccably tailored light blue suit that looked less like clothing and more like armor. Her platinum blonde hair was styled into a helmet of aggressive perfection, not a single strand daring to move in the lake breeze. I killed the engine, letting the old truck shudder into silence, and stepped out onto the driveway. I knew exactly what I looked like to her. I was wearing a faded gray t-shirt from the Department of Sanitation, 3 days of stubble on my face, and boots that had seen more mud than pavement. To a woman like this, I was a glitch in the simulation, a stain on the landscape that needed to be scrubbed away. I set down the thermos of black coffee I had been nursing since crossing the state line, and turned to face what was clearly the local authority figure. She stopped exactly 2 inches from my property line, her eyes scanning me from my worn boots to the oil stain on my jeans, categorizing me instantly as a threat. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice projecting with a frequency that could probably crack crystal. "You cannot park that commercial vehicle here. This is a violation of community standards, and I need to see your authorization papers immediately." I took a slow sip of coffee, letting the silence stretch just long enough to be uncomfortable. "Good morning," I said, keeping my voice low and level. "I am Thorne Wilder. I just closed on this house yesterday afternoon. The trailer will be gone by noon once I finish unloading." She recoiled as if I had spoken in a foreign language. "That is impossible," she snapped, checking something on her clipboard with a manic intensity. "This is the Garrison estate. It has been in probate for 8 months. We have strict vetting protocols for potential buyers in Serenity Shores. And you, sir, have certainly not been vetted by the board." She looked up at me with a sneer that was pure condescension. "I am Serafina Vance, HOA president for the last 15 years, and I can assure you that no sale of this property has been approved. You are trespassing." I watched her face closely. It was a mask of absolute certainty. She genuinely believed that her bylaws superseded state property law. "I have the deed right here," I said, reaching toward the passenger seat of the truck. "Do not move!" she shrieked, taking a step back and pulling a gold-plated smartphone from her pocket. "I am calling the police. You are obviously a squatter or running some kind of scam, and I will not have my neighborhood turned into a crime scene." She dialed 911 with theatrical flair, holding the phone away from her face so I could see her pressing the buttons. I did not stop her. Instead, I leaned against the hood of my Bronco, took another sip of coffee, and tapped the small record button on the dash cam mounted inside my windshield. Serafina Vance began screaming into the phone, weaving a narrative about a violent intruder with a weaponized vehicle blocking emergency access, escalating a simple move-in into a hostage situation within 30 seconds. I kept my face blank, but my blood was boiling at the sheer audacity of this woman. I am curious, where are you guys watching this showdown from? Drop your country in the comments. Let's see how far this story travels. While she performed her one-woman show for the emergency dispatcher, I observed the neighborhood. It was quiet. Too quiet. The curtains in the house across the street twitched. A man washing a boat 3 houses down stopped his work, watching us with the exhausted expression of someone who had seen this play out a dozen times before. Serenity Shores was not a community. It was a fortress, and Serafina was the gatekeeper. She paced back and forth, her light blue suit flashing in the morning sun, loudly describing my physical appearance to the dispatcher as disheveled and threatening. A county sheriff cruiser turned the corner less than 12 minutes later, rolling to a stop with its lights flashing but no siren. Deputy Kalen Briggs stepped out, adjusting his belt. He looked young, perhaps 25, with the weary eyes of a man who dealt with petty suburban tyrants far too often. He walked toward us, his hand resting instinctively near his holster, though his posture suggested annoyance rather than alarm. "Mrs. Vance," Briggs said, nodding to her. "What is the emergency?" "This man," she pointed a manicured finger at my chest, "is trespassing. He claims to own the Garrison property, which is absolutely impossible because I did not approve it. He has a suspicious truck, and I believe he is scouting homes for burglary. I want him arrested and removed immediately." Briggs turned to me. "Sir, is this your vehicle?" "It is," I said calmly. "And this is my house. I have the closing documents and the deed in the truck." "Let me see them," Briggs said. I reached into the cab, moving slowly so as not to startle the young deputy, and pulled out a thick manila envelope. I handed it to him. Briggs opened it, scanning the pages. It contained the standard deed, the mortgage paperwork, and the title insurance policy. But tucked behind those was a document that Serafina Vance had never seen before. A copy of a federal land patent from 1910, signed by the President of the United States, granting the land and its water rights directly to the original owner, free of any future encumbrances. It was a nuclear option in property law, a document that predated the existence of the Homeowners Association by 60 years. Briggs looked at the papers, then back at Serafina. "Mrs. Vance, this looks legitimate." "The deed was recorded with the county as of 4 p.m. yesterday. Mr. Wilder is the legal owner." Serafina's face drained of color, then flushed a deep, angry crimson. "That is fraudulent. I would have been notified. The bylaws clearly state—" "The bylaws do not trump a county deed, ma'am," Briggs said, handing the papers back to me. "And making a false report to 911 is a crime. If Mr. Wilder is the owner, he has a right to be here." Serafina looked at the deputy with betrayal in her eyes. "I will be calling your supervisor, Deputy Briggs. My brother will be very interested to hear that the sheriff's department is allowing vagrants to take over our community." She turned her gaze to me, her eyes cold and hard like polished stones. "You may have tricked the county clerk, Mr. Wilder, but you are in Serenity Shores now. We have rules, and you have already broken 3 of them." She thrust her clipboard toward me, ripping a thick packet of papers from under the clip. "This is your welcome packet. You have exactly until 5 p.m. today to pay the new resident impact fee of $15,000. Page 400 of the bylaws. If you fail to pay, we will place a lien on your property by morning." She spun on her heel and marched back across the street, her light blue suit disappearing behind the heavy oak doors of her massive waterfront mansion. Deputy Briggs sighed, looking at me with a mixture of sympathy and warning. "Watch your step, Mr. Wilder. She does not lose gracefully. Document everything. I intend to, I said. I watched the patrol car drive away, leaving me alone in the driveway with my welcome packet. I carried the heavy stack of papers into the house. I did not start unpacking clothes or kitchenware. I went straight to the study, which had a panoramic view of the lake, and unpacked my real equipment. A high-speed document scanner, 3 encrypted hard drives, and a triple monitor setup that I had used to dismantle fraud rings for the Department of Justice. You see, Serafina Vance saw a garbage man in a beat-up truck. What she did not see was a retired forensic hydrologist and asset forfeiture specialist. I had spent 20 years tracking money through complex water rights disputes and federal land fraud. I did not buy this house to retire and fish. I bought it because 3 months ago, while consulting on a FEMA flood map update, I noticed a statistical anomaly in the water table data for Serenity Shores. The numbers did not add up. The lake levels were being manipulated, and millions of dollars in federal insurance subsidies were flowing into a zip code that should not have qualified. I sat down at the desk and began scanning the bylaws. Page by page, the scanner hummed, digitizing the weapon Serafina tried to use against me. The new resident impact fee was just the tip of the iceberg. As I read through the dense legal jargon, I saw the pattern. Mandatory dredging fees that went to a shell company, view tax assessments that had no basis in state law, and a peculiar clause claiming the HOA owned the lakebed itself. That was the first crack. You cannot own the lakebed of a federally designated navigable waterway. It belongs to the people of the United States, held in trust by the state. If Serafina Vance was selling rights to that water, she wasn't just breaking HOA rules, she was committing federal fraud. I worked until the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the lake in shades of violet and gold. My stomach growled, reminding me I hadn't eaten since breakfast. I walked out onto the back deck, the wood rotting slightly under my boots. The house had good bones, but it had been neglected. The view, however, was worth the battle. The water stretched out, calm and glassy, hiding whatever secrets Serafina had buried beneath the surface. That night, the silence of the lake was broken by the sound of crunching leaves. It was 2 a.m. I was awake reviewing satellite imagery on my laptop when a motion sensor I had placed on the perimeter fence triggered a silent alert on my phone. I switched off the lights in the study and moved to the window, peering out into the darkness. A beam of a flashlight cut through the gloom near the back of my property, right where my land met the conservation easement. I picked up a high-powered thermal monocular from my tactical bag, a parting gift from a colleague at the Bureau of Land Management, and scanned the yard. The heat signature was clear. A man, heavy-set, moving with a clumsy determination. He was carrying a large plastic canister. I recognized him from the photos on the HOA website I had scraped earlier that evening. Barnaby Finch, the head of Community Standards. He was Serafina's enforcer, the man who drove around in a golf cart measuring grass height with a ruler. But he was not measuring grass at 2 a.m. He was kneeling beside my well cap. I watched through the thermal lens as he unscrewed the cap and began pouring the contents of the canister into my water source. My pulse remained steady. Panic is for amateurs. Documentation is for professionals. I quietly opened the window a crack and launched a micro-drone, a tiny device no larger than a hummingbird, equipped with night vision optics. I flew it silently over the yard, hovering 20 feet above Barnaby's head. The camera captured everything. His face illuminated by the flashlight, the label on the canister which read high concentrate herbicide, and the liquid glugging into my well. He was poisoning my water. It was a classic tactic in rural land grabs. Contaminate the private well, force the homeowner to hook up to the community water system, a system controlled undoubtedly by the HOA and billed at extortionate rates. I landed the drone and saved the footage to 3 separate cloud servers before Barnaby had even screwed the cap back on. I did not run out there with a baseball bat. I did not scream. I let him finish. I let him walk away, thinking he had won. By the time he disappeared into the woods, he had committed a felony that carried a mandatory minimum sentence of 10 years. Environmental terrorism is taken very seriously by the EPA, and I still had friends in the enforcement division. The next morning brought a new assault. I was in the kitchen making coffee with bottled water. I would not be touching the tap until the EPA team I called could come out to test it, when I saw a flatbed tow truck backing into my driveway. It was 7 a.m. The sun was barely up. I walked out the front door, mug in hand. The driver was a burly man in a grease-stained jumpsuit, already hooking chains to the front axle of my Bronco. "Drop it," I said, my voice projecting clearly across the lawn. The driver didn't even look up. HOA order, unauthorized commercial vehicle, bylaw section 22. It's getting impounded. "This is private property," I said, walking closer. "And that is not a commercial vehicle. It is a personal truck. If you tow it, you are committing grand theft auto." The driver laughed, a wet, hacking sound. "Look, buddy, Mrs. Vance signed the order. I just haul 'em. You got a problem, take it up with the board. Fees are $500 to hook, $50 a mile to the yard." He cranked the winch, tightening the chains. The Bronco's front tires lifted off the gravel. I pulled out my phone, but I didn't call the police. I opened the browser to a specific page I had bookmarked. "What is your operating license number?" I asked. "Ain't none of your business," he grunted. "Actually," I said, reading from the screen, "under State Transportation Code Section 704, a non-consensual tow from private property requires a signature from the property owner or a law enforcement officer. An HOA president is neither. Furthermore, since you are currently on my land without my permission, you are trespassing. And since you are attempting to remove an asset valued over $5,000, you are engaging in predatory towing practices." I looked him dead in the eye. "I am reading the VIN number of your truck right now. I am going to file a complaint with the Department of Transportation and the State Attorney General's Consumer Protection Division within the next 10 minutes. I will have your commercial driver's license suspended by Friday. Is Mrs. Vance paying you enough to lose your livelihood?" The driver froze. The winch stopped clicking. He looked at me, then at the house across the street where Serafina was watching from behind her sheer curtains. He looked back at his truck, doing the mental math. "She said you were a squatter," the driver muttered, his confidence evaporating. "She lied," I said. "Drop the truck, now." He released the tension on the chains. The Bronco slammed back onto the gravel with a heavy thud. The driver unhooked the cables faster than he had attached them, throwing them back onto the flatbed with a clang. "Don't call me again!" he yelled toward Serafina's house, jumping into his cab. He peeled out of the driveway, spraying gravel onto the asphalt. I stood there for a moment, looking at the window across the street. The curtain dropped back into place. Round 2 to me. But I knew this was just the skirmishing phase. Serafina Vance was probing my defenses, seeing what would stick. She had tried intimidation, financial extortion, poisoning, and theft. She was desperate, which meant she was hiding something or bigger for than a landscaping dispute. I spent the afternoon on the water. I launched a kayak from my rotting dock, paddling out into the center of the cove. To any observer, I was just a new resident enjoying the lake. But beneath the hull of my kayak, I had mounted a portable side-scan sonar unit, the kind used by search and rescue teams to find bodies. I paddled in a grid pattern, back and forth across the frontage of the common areas and Serafina's massive estate. The sonar screen on my tablet painted a picture of the world beneath the murky water. I saw the usual debris, sunken logs, old tires, rocks. And then I saw the ghosts. About 50 yards offshore, running parallel to the coastline behind Serafina's house, were massive concrete structures sitting on the lakebed. Pilings, dozens of them. They were arranged in a perfect marina configuration, with cross-bracing and utility conduits already laid. I stopped paddling, letting the kayak drift. I stared at the screen. This was a multi-million-dollar construction project, entirely underwater, completely invisible from the surface. They were building a massive private marina, but why hide it? Then it clicked. This lake was a designated conservation sanctuary. Motorized boat slips were capped by federal law to protect the wetlands. Serenity Shores had reached its cap 10 years ago. These were illegal slips. Serafina was likely pre-selling them to non-residents or wealthy investors for cash, promising them exclusive access once the permits cleared. Permits that would never be cleared because they were illegal. She was running a Ponzi scheme with boat slips that didn't technically exist yet. This was the money trail. This was why she needed to control the HOA with an iron fist. If anyone looked too closely at the water or the budget for lake maintenance, they would see millions of dollars vanishing into concrete that was sitting at the bottom of the lake. I saved the sonar data and paddled toward a small weathered dock a few houses down. An elderly man was sitting there, fishing line in the water, wearing a hat that looked as old as the hills. He watched me approach with cautious eyes. "Afternoon," I said, drifting close. "Fish biting?" He spat into the water. "Not since the dredging started. Scared 'em all off." "I didn't see any dredgers," I said. "Night work," the man grunted. "They come in at midnight, noisy as hell. Say it's for flood control. I say it's nonsense. They're digging deep channels for big yachts. This lake ain't meant for yachts." "I'm Thorne," I said. "New guy in the garrison place." The man's expression softened slightly. "Merrick Stone, heard you had a run-in with the Empress." "Is that what you call her?" "Fits, don't it? She took my boat last year," Merrick said, his voice thick with bitterness. "Said it was an eyesore. Said it violated the aesthetic harmony of the waterfront. It was a 20-foot pontoon. My dad bought it in '82. They towed it while I was at the doctor's office. Sold it at auction for unpaid fines before I even got home." I felt a cold anger settling in my chest. Asset seizure was my specialty, but doing it to an old man over bylaws was theft masked as bureaucracy. "Did you get the proceeds from the auction?" "Not a dime," Merrick said. "Said it all went to legal fees and storage costs. She stripped me clean, son. Be careful. She's got eyes everywhere." "I appreciate the warning, Merrick," I said. "But I think she's the one who needs to watch her step." Merrick chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. "You got a fight in you. I like that. But fightin' her is like fightin' the tide. She owns the board, the sheriff, and half the county judges. Water always remembers its path, Mr. Stone, I said, repeating a phrase my mentor at the DOJ had taught me. So does the money. I paddled back to my house as the sun set. I had what? Illegal construction and theft. I had the who, Serafina and her enforcers. Now I needed the how. I needed the books. That meant I needed the treasurer. Orion Crest lived 4 houses down in a modest colonial that looked nervous, much like the man himself. I had seen him at the grocery store earlier, glancing over his shoulder as he bought antacids. He was a man living in fear. I decided to make my move. I waited until the next morning, when I knew Serafina would be at her weekly hair appointment. Intel gathered from the neighborhood gossip forum I had hacked into. I walked down the street to Orion's house. He was in his driveway, frantically trying to close the trunk of his sedan, which was filled with boxes. "Going somewhere, Orion?" I asked, leaning against his mailbox. He jumped, dropping his keys. I'm just clearing out some old files." "Who are you?" "Thorne Wilder, the squatter," I said with a dry smile. I picked up his keys and handed them to him. "Those boxes look heavy. They look like financial records. Are we shredding today?" Orion's face went pale. Sweat beaded on his upper lip despite the cool morning air. "I don't know what you're talking about. Please leave me alone. Mrs. Vance said you were dangerous." "I am dangerous," I said softly, stepping closer so only he could hear. "But not to you, Orion. I'm dangerous to people who cook books. I used to audit federal grant misappropriation for a living. I know what a slush fund looks like. I know you're keeping 2 sets of ledgers, one for the residents and one for Serafina." He started to shake. "You don't understand. She knows about my daughter." "The experimental treatment in Mexico?" I guessed. "Insurance won't cover it. Cash only. Expensive. Serafina loaned you the money from the reserve fund, didn't she? And now she owns you." Orion's eyes widened in terror. "How do you know that?" "I know because it's exactly what I would do if I were a sociopath trying to cover up a multi-million-dollar construction fraud," I said. "But here is the thing, Orion. That makes you an accomplice to embezzlement, wire fraud, and racketeering. When the feds come, and they are coming, you will go to prison for 20 years. Your daughter will be alone." He slumped against the car, defeated. "What do you want?" "I want the real ledger," I said. "Not the one you show at the annual meeting. The one that shows where the dredging fees are really going. The one that shows who is paying for the concrete in the lake." "She'll kill me," he whispered. "No, she won't," I said, "because you're going to give me the leverage to bury her before she even knows you flipped. You have 48 hours, Orion. I am filing a RICO Predicate Act notice on Friday. If your name is on the wrong side of that filing, I cannot help you. But if you are a cooperating witness, that changes everything." I left him standing there, terrified and conflicted. It was a cruel play, but necessary. Serafina Vance had weaponized this man's tragedy. I had to use it to save him. If you are still here, you know that messing with federal infrastructure and blackmailing vulnerable fathers is a one-way ticket to prison. Drop an eagle emoji below if you're ready to see the feds roll in and clean the house. I walked back to my property, my mind racing. I had the sonar evidence. I had the intimidation of the tow truck driver. I had the testimony of Merrick Stone. And now, I was close to breaking the treasurer. But Serafina was not done. When I returned to my driveway, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There was a new sign posted on my front lawn. It was professional, metal, driven deep into the ground. Notice of foreclosure hearing. Property, 1400 Lakeview Drive. Action, seizure for unpaid assessments and liens. Hearing date, Monday, 9:00 a.m. She had accelerated the timeline. She wasn't waiting for the $15,000. She had forged a history of unpaid back dues from the previous owner, the Garrison estate, and was moving to seize the house before I could even unpack. She had a judge in her pocket, likely her brother, who would rubber stamp the foreclosure in a closed hearing. I ripped the sign out of the ground and threw it into the back of my truck. "Okay, Serafina," I said to the empty air. "You want to play the legal game? Let's play." I went inside and picked up the phone. I didn't call a local lawyer. I called a number in Washington, D.C., a direct line to the office of the Inspector General at the Department of the Interior. "Agent Miller?" A voice answered after 2 rings. "It's Wilder," I said. "I found the leak, and it's a lot bigger than we thought. I'm going to need a specialized team, and Miller, bring the boats." The war for Serenity Shores had just moved from a skirmish to a full-scale invasion, and Serafina Vance, in her pristine light blue suit, had no idea that she was standing on ground that was about to liquefy beneath her feet. She thought she was evicting a tenant. She was about to indict herself. As I hung up the phone, a heavy knock rattled my front door. I checked the security camera monitor. It wasn't the police. It wasn't Barnaby. It was Verity Banks, the young woman I had seen recording the confrontation on move-in day. She was looking over her shoulder, clutching a USB drive in her hand like it was a grenade. She looked at the camera lens, terrified. "Mr. Wilder," she whispered, her voice barely picked up by the microphone. "I have the recordings, the board meetings, the ones they don't publish. You need to see what they said about you." I unlocked the door. I ushered Verity into the study, locking the heavy oak door behind us. She was trembling, her knuckles white as she gripped the small plastic drive. I motioned for her to sit in the leather armchair facing the lake, offering her a bottle of water, which she accepted with shaking hands. She looked like a woman who had been holding her breath for 5 years and was terrified to finally exhale. "My husband was on the board before Orion," Verity whispered, staring at the black screen of my monitor. "He asked questions about the dredging invoices. 2 weeks later, Serafina reported him to Child Protective Services. An anonymous tip claiming neglect. It took us 6 months to clear our names. We resigned, kept our heads down, but I kept the access codes to the cloud server." She handed me the drive. "These are the backup recordings she thought she deleted." I plugged the drive into my isolated, air-gapped laptop. A list of audio files appeared, dated back 3 years. I clicked on a file labeled Board Meeting Private 04-112. The audio crackled, then Serafina's voice cut through the room, sharp and imperious. "The marina expansion is non-negotiable, Barnaby. I have already taken deposits from the investors in Chicago. We need more slips." "But the conservation easement," a male voice, likely Barnaby, replied. "We are at the federal cap. If the Army Corps of Engineers sees fresh pylons—" "They won't see them," Serafina snapped. "We keep them submerged until the inspector retires in August. I have arranged for his replacement to be cooperative. And if any resident complains, fine them until they move. Use the impact fees to cover the legal costs. Bleed them dry." I looked at Verity. Tears were streaming down her face. "She destroyed this neighborhood for a parking lot," she said. "A parking lot for boats." "No," I said, my voice cold. "She destroyed it for leverage, but she just handed us the hammer." I spent the next 3 hours transcribing the audio, linking specific threats to bank transfers I had uncovered in the public records. The picture was complete. Serafina Vance wasn't just a tyrant. She was running a racketeering enterprise. She was using HOA dues to fund illegal construction, then using the illegal construction to solicit wire fraud investments, all while terrorizing witnesses into silence. The next morning, the summons arrived. It wasn't a subtle note. It was a bright orange paper taped to my front door by Barnaby himself. Emergency community meeting. Mandatory attendance. Agenda. Removal of unauthorized resident. The meeting was scheduled for 7 p.m. at the community clubhouse. Serafina was moving fast, trying to rally the mob to legitimize her seizure of my home before the federal gears could turn. She wanted a public execution. I prepared accordingly. I shaved. I traded my sanitation t-shirt for a charcoal gray tailored suit that I hadn't worn since my last hearing at the Supreme Court. I packed a slim leather briefcase with exactly 3 documents. When I walked into the clubhouse, the noise died instantly. The room was packed with about 50 residents, sitting in folding chairs. Serafina stood on a raised stage, flanked by Barnaby and a sweating Orion crest. She was wearing her signature light blue suit, looking every inch the queen addressing her subjects. Behind her, a projector displayed a grainy photo of my Bronco and a bulleted list of my crimes. "And there he is," Serafina announced, pointing a remote at me like a weapon. "The man who thinks he is above our laws. The squatter who refuses to pay his fair share." A low murmur ran through the crowd. I walked down the center aisle, the sound of my dress shoes sharp against the linoleum. I didn't look at the angry faces. I looked straight at Serafina. I didn't stop until I was standing directly in front of the stage. "You have the floor, Mr. Wilder," Serafina said, her smile tight and predatory. "Explain to these good people why you believe you can steal from their community funds." I placed my briefcase on the edge of the stage and clicked the latches open. The sound echoed in the silent room. "I am not here to explain myself, Mrs. Vance," I said, my voice projecting without a microphone. "I am here to ask a question." "This is not a Q&A," Barnaby grunted, stepping forward. I ignored him. "I have reviewed the HOA insurance policy," I continued, holding up a single sheet of paper. "It is a comprehensive liability policy, paid for by the dues of everyone in this room. Can you explain to the community why the sole beneficiary of the payout clause is listed as Vance Marine Development, LLC?" The room went deadly quiet. Serafina's smile faltered for a fraction of a second before she recovered. "That is a holding company for community assets. Standard procedure." "Is it?" I pulled the second document. "Because according to the Secretary of State, Vance Marine Development is a private entity registered to your husband, with no legal ties to the HOA. Which means every dollar of maintenance fees paid by these people is being funneled into your personal construction company." "Lies!" Serafina shrieked, her composure cracking. "Security! Remove him!" Barnaby lunged off the stage, reaching for my arm. I didn't flinch. I turned to the crowd, raising the third document. "And this," I said, holding up the sonar scan of the lake bed, "is what you are paying for." illegal underwater foundations for a private marina that none of you will be allowed to use. She is selling your lake access to outsiders. That is enough, Serafina screamed. Cut his mic! Get him out! Barnaby grabbed my shoulder. I leaned in close to him. Touch me again, Barnaby, and I add assault to your federal indictment. He froze. He had seen the look in my eyes before, the night he poisoned the well. He let go. I straightened my jacket and looked at the crowd. The water always remembers, neighbors, and so does the bank. I turned and walked out. I didn't need to win the vote. I needed to plant the seed. As I exited the double doors, I saw Orion Crest staring at me from the stage, his face the color of ash. He knew. He knew the game was over. I returned to my house and locked the doors. The trap was set. Serafina was cornered, humiliated in front of her kingdom. She would lash out. She had to. It was the only move a narcissist had left. The attack came at 2:14 a.m. I was in the study, monitoring the network traffic from the HOA office. A little trick I managed after finding their router password was Serenity 1. I saw Serafina logging in, frantic. Then I saw a text message command sent to Barnaby's phone. Cut the line. Kill his server. Now. She thought my investigation relied on the internet connection to the house. She thought if she cut the power and the fiber optic cable, she could stop the flow of evidence to the authorities. I watched the security feed. Barnaby's truck rolled to a stop at the utility junction box at the edge of my property. This box didn't just service my house. It was a node for the regional environmental monitoring grid, housing a federal flood sensor that tracked water table levels for the entire county. Barnaby pried the box open with a crowbar. He was clumsy, panicked. He took a pair of heavy-duty bolt cutters and jammed them into the thick bundle of cables. Snap. The lights in my house died. The hum of the refrigerator ceased. Total darkness. But in the silence, a red LED on my tactical console blinked to life. System alert. Critical infrastructure failure. Homeland Security notification sent. Barnaby hadn't just cut my Netflix. By severing the connection to a federal flood sensor, he had committed sabotage against critical infrastructure. This was no longer a local police matter. This was a Department of Homeland Security incident. I sat in the dark and smiled. Serafina had just authorized an act of domestic terrorism to hide a zoning violation. If you are still here, you know that messing with federal infrastructure is a one-way ticket to prison. Drop an eagle emoji below if you're ready to see the feds roll in. 20 minutes later, a soft thud sounded on my front porch. I waited a moment, then opened the door. The porch was empty, save for a thick, leather-bound ledger lying on the doormat. Orion Crest had made his choice. I picked up the book. It was heavy. I took it inside and shone a flashlight on the pages. It was all there. The double entries. The bribes to the county inspector. The cash payments from Chicago investors for illegal boat slips. The transfers to Serafina's personal offshore accounts. I didn't sleep. I spent the rest of the night organizing the evidence into a digital briefing package. The sonar scans. The drone video of the well poisoning. Verity's audio recordings. The server logs of the power cut. And finally, Orion's ledger. At 7 a.m., I didn't drive to the police station. I drove to the federal courthouse in the city, 2 hours away. I met Agent Miller in a conference room that smelled of stale coffee and justice. He was a man who looked like he was carved out of granite, with eyes that had seen every scam humanity had to offer. "You brought the boat?" Miller asked, looking at the sonar prints. "I brought the whole marina," I said, sliding the ledger across the table. Miller flipped through the pages. He stopped at a specific entry. "She bribed a federal surveyor? $200,000? "It's on page 42, I said. "Check the date against the flood map revision." Miller closed the book. He looked at the team of agents assembling behind the glass wall. "We're going to need a bigger warrant." "There is one more thing, I said. "She is holding a victory gala tonight, on the pier. She thinks she won because my power is out." Miller checked his watch. "Then we better not be late for the party." The drive back to Serenity Shores was the longest of my life. I was part of a convoy now, though the unmarked SUVs hung back, waiting for the signal. The sun was setting as I pulled into my driveway. The power was still out, but the neighborhood was glowing. Down at the water, lights were strung up along the massive community dock. Music drifted on the breeze. Serafina Vance was throwing herself a coronation. I changed back into my suit. I walked down to the water's edge. From my deck, I had a perfect view of the festivities. Tables with white linens were set up on the very structure that was illegally anchored to the lake bed. Waiters circulated with champagne. Serafina was holding court in the center, wearing a fresh light blue suit that shimmered under the string lights. She looked triumphant. She looked untouchable. Merrick Stone was standing by the shoreline, watching sadly. I walked over to him. "She won, didn't she?" Merrick said, spitting into the sand. "Power's out. You're quiet. She's celebrating." "She didn't win, Merrick," I said, checking the time on my phone. "She just set the stage." "For what?" "For the finale." At exactly 8:15 p.m., the music stopped. Not because the band took a break, but because a deep, amplified voice boomed across the water from the darkness of the lake. "Attention on the dock. This is the United States Coast Guard. Remain where you are." Searchlights blinded the partygoers. 3 high-speed response boats roared out of the darkness, their blue lights reflecting off the water surrounding the pier. The ghost docks beneath the surface were suddenly illuminated by underwater flares deployed by Coast Guard divers. Simultaneously, the driveway to the pier was flooded with vehicles, but they weren't local sheriffs. They were black SUVs with government plates. FBI agents in windbreakers poured out, moving with the precision of a surgical team. The party dissolved into chaos. Guests dropped champagne glasses. Waiters froze. But Serafina Vance stood alone in the spotlight, shielding her eyes against the glare of the police boats. "What is the meaning of this?" she screamed, her voice cracking. "I am the president of this association. Who is in charge here?" Deputy Kalen Briggs walked onto the pier first. He looked different tonight. Confidence. He wasn't working for her anymore. He walked right up to her, ignoring her outstretched finger. "Step aside, Mrs. Vance," Briggs said. "Arrest them!" she shrieked, pointing at the Coast Guard boats. "They are trespassing on private water." "It's not private water, Serafina," a voice said. I stepped onto the pier, flanked by Agent Miller. The crowd parted for us. I saw the recognition in her eyes, the sudden, terrifying realization that the garbage man was the executioner. "You," she whispered. "You did this." "No," I said, my voice calm and carrying over the silent crowd. "You did this. When you poisoned a well, when you stole a boat, when you cut a federal power line." Agent Miller stepped forward, holding a document that was much heavier than a welcome packet. "Serafina Vance, I am Special Agent Miller with the Office of the Inspector General. You are under arrest." "For what?" she spat, trying to maintain her posture. "A zoning violation." "For 34 counts of federal racketeering," Miller said, his voice flat. "Wire fraud, environmental terrorism, conspiracy to defraud the United States government, and sabotage of critical infrastructure." He didn't wait for her response. "Cuff her." An agent spun her around. The click of the handcuffs was the loudest sound in the county. Serafina began to scream, a primal sound of pure rage, but it was cut short as she was marched past her stunned neighbors. Her light blue suit, once a symbol of her power, looked cheap under the harsh glare of the federal searchlights. I looked over at the golf cart parked near the entrance. Barnaby Finch was sitting in the driver's seat, weeping into his hands as an agent read him his rights. Orion Crest was sitting on a bench nearby, talking quietly to an investigator, looking like a man who had finally put down a heavy weight. The raid lasted all night. Boxes upon boxes of files were hauled out of Serafina's mansion. The divers mapped the illegal underwater structures. The tow trucks came, but this time they were towing Serafina's luxury cars, seized as proceeds of crime. The next morning, the sun rose over a different Serenity Shores. The for sale sign on my lawn was gone, but a new sign was posted on the community board. Under federal receivership. I sat on my deck, drinking coffee from my thermos. The power was back on. The silence was peaceful, not oppressive. Merrick Stone walked onto his dock 3 houses down. He was carrying a fishing rod. He cast his line into the water, and for the first time in years, nobody shouted at him. He looked over at me and tipped his hat. I later learned that Serafina's bail was denied. The flight risk was too high, given the offshore accounts Orion had revealed. She was facing 20 years. Her husband's shell company was liquidated. Under the False Claims Act, because I had initiated the investigation and provided the evidence of fraud against the government, I was entitled to a percentage of the recovered assets. It was a significant sum. I didn't keep it. I set up a trust for the neighborhood. The Serenity Restoration Fund. Its first project was to remove the illegal concrete from the lake bed and restore the wetlands. Its second project was to pay for the medical treatment of a certain young girl in Mexico whose father had finally done the right thing. Merrick got a new boat. Verity got her position back on the board, this time with transparency. I finished my coffee and looked out at the water. It rippled gently, hiding nothing, reflecting the sky. They looked at my old truck and saw a victim. They looked at my silence and saw weakness. They should have looked at the water. It never lies, and neither do the ledgers. Serafina Vance wanted to own the view. Now, her only view is concrete bars and a slice of sky she can't control. Justice is a dish best served with federal warrants. If you want more stories where the corrupt get absolutely dismantled, smash that subscribe button. Stay vigilant.
Thanks for staying to the end. Don't forget to like and subscribe to IS Stories.